Um, I would also just like to thank our sponsors and supporters, Blackboard Collaborate, which is a great platform, as well as the Learning Revolution Project, which is really allowing us to have this opportunity to learn from one another, as well as ClassFlow. So thank you again to all of our sponsors and supporters. We're going to take a moment to see, again, where everyone is from. So you're going to use your whiteboard pointer. You should see something on your left that will kind of look like that symbol, a little sun, and you're going to point to your location, where you are from. Hopefully there are people from all over the world joining us today. I see someone from the East Coast. If there's anyone, wow, we have someone from, I guess, Canada. Wow, that's awesome. If anyone else wants to share what, where they're from, just take a moment to find your pointer and point to your location. Wow. Calgary, that's awesome. That's great. Oh, Calgary, that's awesome. And then I see someone from, I think that's India. Wow, so great. It's great to have you guys there, and hopefully as more people come into the room and they'll share where they're from. I'm going to now start the presentation, and again, our presentation is called What is Project-Based Learning? And if you guys can also share, what kind of role you have in your programs or in your workplaces or in your school, so that, why you're interested in this webinar, that would be very helpful. So in the chat box, please write down, why you're interested in this webinar, and that will help us to really understand how we can help you and give strategies that are relevant for you. So project-based learning is a great tool to use in terms of just a great model to use with your students, or just even in your own learning, where you're going to just do some great activities as well as great, I guess, projects that will help you to really focus on a subject and really help you to be engaged in your learning. So we're going to kind of talk about the model, and we're going to talk about different strategies. So, oh great, welcome to our room. I see some of you guys are from an online school, as well as a consultant for the Ministry of Education, as well as a director at a school. So we see a lot of broad range of different backgrounds and interests, and so hopefully, you guys can also share some of your experiences with project-based learning to help us to kind of see how we can apply it. So again, my name is Judy Ha, and I'm the Training and Development Manager here at Foundations, Inc. And my background is that I was a teacher for several years. I taught middle school social studies as well as ESOL. I also have some nonprofit experience doing after-school programs as well as summer programs where, I used a lot of these ideas for project-based learning. I want to share a little bit about Foundations, Inc. And Foundations, Inc. is a nonprofit located in New Jersey in the United States, and we do services for schools, after-school programs, as well as the community. We're very much grounded in practice. We want to make sure, everything that we're doing is relevant for those who are, actually working with the students or working with the community. We're also a capacity building institute where we really want to provide professional development to really equip, the teachers or staff members to really, use their skills and really be effective using the latest, practices, best practices in their environments. So hopefully if you're interested, please check out our website at the end of this webinar. So today's learning objectives is, again, understanding project-based learning and why it's effective. We also are going to kind of break down the components of what makes a quality project-based learning unit, as well as discuss very specific strategies for working with youth. And hopefully, we can kind of think of it at different levels of education as well, whether it's, working with college students or even high school students or even elementary school students or just out of school time adults or youth. So the first question I'm going to explore, we call this a Chatbox challenge, where you're going to, again, in your Chatbox, write your response to this question. What does student-driven learning look like? So again, some of you are working with college students, some of you might be working with young students in your community. What does student-driven learning look like? You can write your response down in the Chatbox. What does it look like for students to really be interested in their learning? What would student engagement look like? A choice of web tools, right? Allowing opportunities for students to connect via different tools, where they're, maybe they're really interested in doing something online. So that's one way. Kind of starting with what are their interests, right? Collaboration, right? Helping students to kind of work together. Students, I think young people are very interested in kind of socializing while they're learning, and that's a great way to really engage them. Students coming up with their own answers, right? Just allowing students to have a voice, okay? So those are great answers. So here's some other things about in terms of what students kind of gain through this kind of project-based learning. Interested, choice, collaboration, those are great. Yes, asking their own questions, right? So what students gain when they're doing project-based learning is, they're having a voice, they're having a choice, so they're being confident, they're able to use their critical thinking skills, just having leadership skills as they're kind of doing these projects. And, it has also effect on the programs themselves where, students are, as they're more engaged, they stay in the program, they have deeper relationships, and, the program kind of comes alive as students, really feel like they're engaged. And it also impacts your staff, right? As students are really interested in their learning, it motivates the staff to also be engaged in learning. So we kind of see how, just by allowing the youth to be engaged and drive their learning, that, it really makes the program overall better. So I'm kind of curious in terms of, what is your experience with project-based learning? So we're going to do a little poll, and you should see again in above your chat box, there's an option for submitting your answers for a poll. It should be a little box with a letter, and if you could again in the click on what letter applies to you. What is your experience level with project-based learning? A, have you never heard of it? B, have you heard of it but want to learn more? C, I've tried it but need more ideas, support, or D, I'm fine-tuning our PBL approach. So if you're I see one person has tried it but need more ideas. Some person has heard of it and want to learn more. Any other responses in terms of where you are with your experience? So I'm glad that there's definitely some people who have some experience with it and that they're really interested in doing more with it. I'm really curious as to, also like the type of projects that you have been able to do with your students. So hopefully that'll come up as we go on in this webinar. So project-based learning, again, it's a little bit different in terms of kind of thinking about it in terms of activities versus projects. So, in a normal classroom, we have lots of activities where the teacher plans it. It's very predictable. It's very school-based. But project-based learning, it's very much, again, student-directed. It's a little bit more challenging as students have more responsibilities. It's open-ended where, students are going to be exploring and really problem-solving. And also, it's more real-world based, as in we want it to be relevant, we want it to be meaningful for the students as well as educational. So that's kind of how we're making the projects something more, a deeper way of learning. And hopefully that'll come clear as we talk about the model. So here's some reasons for why project-based learning works, and this is from the Buck Institute of Education. It's a research-based education website that we often refer to. And project-based learning works because, again, it reinforces core content knowledge. It's not just projects that are, just fun for the students, but it's also very much educational. And we're, again, building 21st century skills where students might be working in groups, they might be problem solving, they are using higher order thinking skills. And also, if you look at the picture on the right, there's, it's really active learning where the students are doing something, whether they're service learning or doing a project that explores the environment. It's really helping the students to be engaged in the world around them and the community. And so it's really hands-on. It really helps the students to see tangibly how their learning is going to make a difference. So some of you are, I think, involved in academic areas, and this is kind of an example of how you might use project-based learning and tie it to academics. So whether you're doing science or math or reading, or if you're, again, working at these different grade levels, you can make a real-world connection and just have very specific projects that the students are working on. So for example, for environmental science, an example might be you might have the students work on a project that has to do with water pollution. So you can kind of take any kind of academic area and think of very specific projects that are age appropriate as well as relevant to them. In the chat box, if you want to write down any ideas that you have already done, I'm actually curious, are there any specific academic areas that people are focusing on? Are you guys teaching reading? Are you guys doing projects related to science or social studies? If you can kind of note that in the chat box, it would be very helpful. English, great. You can definitely do project-based learning in English, where you have reading topics. Death of a Salesman is a novel that you could probably use an example. So for Death of a Salesman, you could have, that's the story of someone who is struggling during this he's losing his job, the times are changing, and so you can make that connection to even today, the economy's not doing so well, so maybe students can do a project where they're studying, what's happening in the economy today and really tie it back to what they're reading. Are there any other subjects that people are working on or areas of interest that you can mention in the chat box? So it's a very useful tool as you think about, how can you make the learning come alive with what the topics you are already doing in your classroom or with your programs or in your community. So again, project-based learning is all about a new mindset. One is, just approaching the youth in your programs differently, where you understand that youth are learning best by doing something, by actively using their hands, actively using their minds. Also, it's a new mindset for the staff as well, as it requires a different approach. It's not so much teacher-directed or adult-led, but it's really a facilitating process, and it's really allowing the students to really step up. Okay, so Andrea, you mentioned that you're doing all kinds of academics, so that you're doing lots of different, you have lots of different opportunities to use project-based learning, which is great. So here's the chat box challenge again. So again, a lot of you guys have different roles, but maybe kind of think about what does it mean to facilitate learning for students. Some of you are working with very young students, and some of you are working with older students. What does it look like to facilitate learning, especially in like a project-based model? What would it look like for the adults? What are some things adults should do, and what are some things that adults shouldn't do? Can you guys maybe write some ideas in the chat box? You can kind of use some of the visuals as an example as well. Are the adults mainly talking? Okay, we see teachers are the guides on the side, not the stage. Not on the center stage, right? You're really letting the students use their voice, right? Don't tell how to do something. Exactly. That's exactly the traditional model of teaching, where you say, okay, here's the work you're doing, and this is exactly how you're doing it. But asking questions, helping the students to come up with their own ideas, their own methods, and obviously you don't want students to feel like they don't know what they're doing or feel like they're not supported, but adults are there to really guide them and help them and really continue to help them stay on track. Those are great suggestions. We have a tool that called Being a Good Facilitator that, again, could be applied to any level of learning. Yes, exactly. Adults are learners too, and adults can actually learn a lot as they watch the students going through this process. So this tool will kind of help you. It has some tips in terms of setting clear expectations and kind of norms for what that project-based learning environment looks like. It's very important to kind of set those expectations and help students know what's expected so that they can really be responsible for their own behavior. At the same time, you want adults to circulate, watch, and listen, and be proactive so that the students know that the adults care about them. The adults want to support them in this process, and kind of modeling, what it looks like to be, engaged in the project. Also, just encouraging cooperation. Adults can really help groups to kind of help them work better together and really just challenge them to do the best that they can. So this is a great tool. We will email this to you at the end of the webinar if you contact us. So this is available for you. So this is actually, now we're going to start talking about the project-based learning model. And how many of you guys are familiar with this model and have used it? I think some of you have mentioned that you are using project-based learning. I'm not sure if you use this particular model, but this is a model that we use. It starts with the top box, which is assessing needs and interests. That's, again, meeting the students where they are, what are the needs in the community, what are they really interested in, and then it leads them to creating a driving question where, they really narrow down what they want to focus on. And then the next part is kind of the main hands-on part where they're gathering knowledge, they're figuring out how to answer the question, as well as planning a culminating event where they present what they've learned and really show that they've grown through that process. And lastly, they document learning and reflect so that, they kind of look back and say, wow, I did learn a lot through this process, and they can kind of continue to grow and, use what they learned for the next project that they might be doing. So this is kind of the tool that we'll be using, and we'll kind of actually go through each of these steps. So the first step is assessing needs and interests. And again, I said that we are starting with what are the students interested in? What really gets them excited about learning? And again, you want to tie it to things that they are learning in school or in their programs. And we want to make it educational and meaningful, as well as very relevant to them. You know, we don't want them to just do, you know, something that's just fun, but we also want it to make sure that it is something that, you know, they do set these learning goals, and it's really going to help them to just understand you know, subjects and areas more deeply. And also thinking about needs. You know, we want to do a project that's going to be useful and you know, applicable to what they're doing in their community or in their school, so that it is really preparing them for the future as well. So one way to kind of assess what needs are is a Category 5 brainstorm. So brainstorming is a great way to start this project-based learning process. So, you know, kind of you can imagine this hurricane where, again, you just have all these ideas as students get excited about what they're learning. So you would ask them, you know, let's just brainstorm. What are some ideas that you or your students would be interested in? So even in the chat box, maybe you've already started thinking about, you know, what are some things that my students would be interested in doing projects about. Maybe there's some community needs. Maybe there's some specific youth interests. You know, maybe some of them are very interested in school day content, very specific, you know, subjects like science or math. They're really interested in that. Or some of them might be really interested in controversial issues or current events, things that are already happening in the community. Actually, I'd be really curious in terms of what are the types of projects that your students have come up with in the past, or your programs have come up with in the past, in terms of what kinds of project-based learning activities that you've already done or would be interested in doing. Please write those ideas down in the chat box. And this is a great opportunity for us to kind of share those ideas as well. So I know for me, in my summer programs, we've done a lot of projects that have to do with community gardens. I've done a lot of projects, you know, just studying the environment. Great leadership and team building. That's a great kind of project where you're really helping students to kind of examine, you know, what will help them to grow as, you know, change makers in their community. Are there any other topics in terms of what would help students to really grow in their learnings? What they would be, you know, is a need that, you know, maybe that they wanted to study in their community. I know we had, you know, people from all over the world, and I'm sure that there's just lots of different areas that, you know, are affecting your community or affecting your school that you feel like students would be really interested in addressing. So this brainstorming process is something you can do with your students and really encourage them. You know, all the ideas that they come up with are great, and the more ideas, the better. And we have this tool called the Brainstorm Planner. Again, this is available in the files in their email to you. And this is a tool that you can use to help your students to kind of brainstorm their ideas. Some of the things that that will help you is, you know, thinking about what guidelines, you know, how are you going to do this brainstorming, and how are you going to record these responses? Making sure that, you know, the expectations are that, you know, there are no right, wrong, or silly responses, and that we're just going to encourage everyone to be excited about what they're learning. Also, you're going to have just kind of things to think about, you know, what time limits they're going to have, you know, kind of looking back and seeing, you know, how did that brainstorm go? Did the students get really engaged? Do we need to have another brainstorming session so that we can kind of, again, just have more responses or just more engagement or just more planning for the next step? So again, this is a tool that you would use with your staff in planning these brainstorming sessions, and really, you know, just helping the students to really get excited and really assess what they need to research. This is another tool called Knowing Your Community, and this is, for some of us, maybe we don't know what the needs are in our community, and maybe the students also don't know what they should study or what they are interested in. So this tool kind of gives questions to ask about your community. For instance, you know, what kind of people live in your community? Who are the people in need? What are the interests of the people in your community? Another question has to do with spaces. You know, where are the spaces in your community? What are places of improvement or places that need to be explored or just impacted? So again, you're kind of helping the students to think deeper about what's around them. And also, you can ask, you know, what are the sources of information? There are plenty of resources in the community, other nonprofits or other adults and community members that students can ask these questions and really get a better sense of what is important and what is meaningful, and you know, what is an area that we could, as students, really problem solve and explore. So again, I talked a little bit about connecting with the community, and, you know, again, having these partnerships with the others in the community is very important in this process, because we recognize that every community has, just great resources, and to really understand the needs, we encourage that you do connect with these community organizations, see them as, an assets-based group where they can provide a lot of resources, but we also expect that we really want the students to be the kind of the center of learning, so really setting those clear expectations for, what the role of the student will be, as well as what the role of the community partner will be, and also knowing that it's a great way to share knowledge and information, whether the students are learning about their community, or the students are able to share what they learned with their community organizations, and really, be engaged. And I think a lot of that interaction and dialogue will just help the community just be just a place that is growing, and really encouraging that dialogue. So we really encourage that. So the next step, after you've kind of assessed the needs and the interests of the students, is to create a driving question. And again, once you have that brainstorm, there's tons of questions, tons of excitement about the project, but we really want to help the students to really focus and narrow down, and that's what creating the driving question is. So in terms of creating a driving question, you want the students to think about, is this a question that has multiple answers? Are there ways in which the question is not just, something that's going to have a yes-no answer, but really something that they can explore deeply and just go deeper into? Is it integrated with school day content? Is it something that is going to be have an academic and learning goal? Is it going to be something that's challenging? We want something where the students are not going to just be done after a week. We want them to be really growing in their skills and in their knowledge. So hopefully it's a challenging question. Another thing is that, is it connected with the real world, right? There's lots of questions we could explore, but we want these projects to be really meaningful and really important for them. And lastly, is it narrow and measurable? You could have a question like, what makes the sun, I don't know, some impossible question that obviously the students can't figure out in, the span of the project. So we want something where they can really do a project in a finite time and really be successful in it. All right, so we have an example of what a driving question might look like. So the question we have here is, what makes school lunches so bad? So maybe this is an example of, a project that you might do with your students in a school. What makes school lunches so bad? So is this a good question? What do you guys think? Is this a good question, a good driving question? Is this something that has multiple answers? Can the students say that there's a lot of answers to this question? Is this something that they can really explore deeply? Is it integrated with school day content? Okay, it's a very biased question, right? Yeah, it seems like, yes, school lunches are bad. Okay, end of project, right? So it's not very challenging, right? So is it connected with the real world? Does this help us, is it helping us to connect with beyond the school? And also, is it narrow and measurable? Can we measure, how bad these lunches are? So I guess thinking about any other ideas in terms of, is this a good question? Any other ideas of what would make it better? So this is not a very good question, right? So in terms of how can we rephrase this question to focus more specifically on nutrition, right? When we make it about nutrition, we're really making it connected to the real world, right? And helping students to kind of see, something that they can really explore, not just why lunches are bad, but, what could make lunches better, right? And that's actually problem solving, and also, something that they can really research and, also think about in terms of school day content, about what makes a healthy lunch and what is nutritious. And these are things that, are academics focused, as well as, might be very interesting for them to learn. And, it's also good for their own health, right? Just thinking about this issue. So a better question might be, how can we redesign a week of school lunches to make them more nutritious and appealing? So you can kind of see, is this a question that does have multiple answers? Yes, there's lots of kind of ways that students can create this week of school lunches, right? Integrated with school day content, yes, that they can think about nutrition, and definitely it's more challenging, it's connected to the real world, and it's something very doable for these students. So this is a tool that you can use to help you plan your projects, and we will also make this available in our emailing. Okay, Fed Up with Lunch, is that a resource that you have used with thinking about nutrition and lunches? I think that that looks like a great resource. So yes, I encourage you, as you think about these driving questions, to really also provide your students with resources to really do that research. So this, again, this project planning review is going to be available at the end of this webinar, and it's a tool for staff to kind of check themselves as they're facilitating this project. So some questions you might ask yourself as their students are making these driving questions is, what is at the heart of this project? What does it take to do the project? Is it doable? Who needs to be involved? What are the roles and responsibilities for staff, for the participants? This is a great way to kind of check yourself and make sure that you don't start this huge project without knowing if the students can actually do it, right? So you want to make sure that as they're creating these driving questions, that it is very doable. It's something that's going to be meaningful. Also, is it driven by the kids' interests? Are the kids going to be, engaged throughout this project? Thinking about, what are the outcomes of this project? Are they going to really learn skills? Are they really going to increase in their knowledge? And how are they going to demonstrate that, right? So you kind of want to think about even, what the final project might look like so that students really are able to kind of be responsible, plan out their learning as they do this project. Okay, so now we're at the very middle of this model, and this is kind of the heart of this project-based learning, where the students are gathering knowledge and they're planning a culminating event. This is kind of where the hands-on learning happens. This is where they're actually doing the tasks and applying the skills that they'll need to finish their project. So what is gathering knowledge? So if we use it in the context of the school lunches, what are the students doing to kind of gain knowledge, right? They might be doing research, and again, using websites, using different books, using the web is a great way to do research. Some of that gathering knowledge might happen through observations. Maybe they actually have to go, to the lunchroom and make observations, or go visit classrooms and see what students are eating during their snack time. You might also have students doing interviews where they're talking to people, surveying people, to get a sense of how do we solve this problem, right? How do we redesign these lunches? Collecting data and compiling materials, that's kind of all that happens as they're gathering information to really complete this project. Culminating events. So again, why were they doing all that gathering knowledge? Because we want to, grow through that process and also be able to share it with other people. And these are types of events that you might do, at the end of a project to really help the students kind of celebrate their learning, really share what they learn, and be proud of what they've learned, right? So an example for the school lunch program might be, you might have the students actually present some of those meal ideas, at a party or a reception. You might have them do a presentation to, the principal of the school to really implement these changes. You might have them even make a website about what makes, a healthy lunch, right? So these are different ways based on, what are the interests of your students, what do they want to do with their project, what are they good at doing, so that they, really are excited about how to end this project and also be excited to share it with other people. So here's our Chatbox challenge. So what are some ways in which your students might gather knowledge? How would your students gather knowledge to redesign that week of school lunches? And also, what would your final product and culminating event be for this project? Do you guys have any ideas in terms of how we could, engage students, in furthering this project? So let's start with the first question. What are some ways of gathering the knowledge? So we talked about surveys, we talked about interviews. What are some other ways that students can kind of gain knowledge, collect data to do a project? TED Talks, that might be a good resource, right? Just helping students to really utilize the web is a great, global world, right? There's lots of things. Survey, observe, explore, invite experts, and that's a great way, especially, people in your community. You might have just chefs. Exactly, chefs that know about school lunches. Actually, I think in Philadelphia, there's a chef that comes into schools and actually prepares some of these lunches, which is a great tool. So there's lots of ways to kind of help your students to gather knowledge. Using technology is a great way. And hopefully, we'll maybe provide resources in terms of what other places you can kind of gain this knowledge. How about in terms of final products and culminating events? What are some ways that your students would love to kind of present their projects? Some of them are really into technology, right? Maybe they want to make a movie or a documentary about this project, right? Some of them might want to make a website, right? Some of your students, yeah, giving them a choice, right? Exactly. What are the ways that they want to, what are they good at doing? What are they interested in doing? Making a family recipe book, right? That's a great way to bring in the community and bring in families and really allow students to feel they're welcomed and included. So there's lots of ways you can really make these projects individualized as well as educational for the students. This is also a tool that you can use to help your students to kind of plan out their programs. It's called the Investigation Project Guide. And again, this is kind of helping your students to be very responsible and organized in their learning. And again, in this tool guide, they're writing down what are the questions that they're going to investigate, writing when they're going to start, when they're going to end. If they are working in a group, they're going to write their group members' names down. They're also thinking about, how are they going to investigate, right? Thinking about what are the methods they're going to use, who are the people they're going to talk to, as well as what are they going to need, whether it's materials or access to technology, or maybe it's even just adult members that they will need to ask advice for. So this is a great tool to kind of help them explore those questions. And also write down an action plan, right? Who's going to do what, when are they going to do it, and what are they going to do? It's really going to help them to be organized, work together, and just really plan ahead. And also, there's a bottom part where they're writing their signature, so really committing to this project and really showing that they're going to be responsible and kind of, really preparing them for the real world, right? As they think about their future jobs, it's really helping them to kind of be independent as well as responsible for their work. Yes, exactly. Timelines, organizational tools, these are great ways to really support and facilitate these projects. This is also a great way to help their students to kind of imagine, what their project would look like. This is, very similar to really preparing them for their future careers, right? Helping them to plan out their weeks. So if it's a 4-week project, helping them to see, okay, week 1, they'll need to design and gather information, right? And week 2 and week 3, that's when they're doing the, just really, I guess, doing that additional data collection as well as, preparing for their final event. And then last week, they're going to, again, just wrap up the program and wrap up their project and really be prepared to present it, whether they upload it to the school website or they design menus. You're really going to help them kind of see what that process is so that they kind of stay on track and they're really able to be successful in completing their project. So now we're at the final stage of this model, which is the document, learning, and reflect. And again, this is a time where the students are really going to be able to see the progress that they've made through this project, just the different knowledge that they've gained, as well as just the skills that they've gained through this project. And we're going to kind of share how you can help them to do that. So when we think of demonstrations of learning, a typical approach is, students are going to write a report, write down a paper or just, write down what they learned. But as we are in this global age, there's just a lot of different ways that students can express their learning, right? You kind of see a little child holding a video camera. So again, using that technology of creating a film or a movie. Are there other examples in terms of, how you see your students demonstrating what they're learning? Beyond the traditional, writing a paper, or just, standing up in front of the room and doing, a presentation. Yeah, digital projects, right? Really using the technology that we have, using the internet. It's a great way to share this learning. I can think of ways in which, you really are allowing the students to work together and be creative, right? Maybe they're doing a skit to present their information, or maybe they're doing some kind of, play or performance to really show that what they are learning. So kind of, expanding upon your traditional ways of presenting these projects is also a great encouragement and motivation to your students. So one way to kind of document the learning is this is a resource that we'll also share at the end of our webinar. And some ways, again, we talked about products where students are actually creating artwork or a website or just a play where they're just showing, what they learned, and there's actually proof that they learned something, right, when they create something. Presentations is also another way to just end a project and show what they learned, right? Portfolios is also a great way to kind of collect all the materials that the students used or created through the project, and it just help them see the progress of their work. A checklist is also another way to kind of track their learning, as well as logs, right? Through periodically just helping them to write down, how many hours they spent on something, or what tasks that they have completed, so that they're really showing that, they've done a lot through this project. And lastly, evaluation rubrics is also a great way to document the learning. So, some of these projects, they seem more open-ended, right? So it's hard to just give them a very specific grade, but if you give them an evaluation rubric, they kind of see exactly how they grew through that project, right? The different skills, the different goals that they met through the project. So, our Chatbox challenge now is, how does your program kind of assess student learning right now? Does your program use traditional forms of assessment? How do you think, now that we talked a little bit about other ways of assessing students, how do you think you guys plan to assess project-based learning moving forward? Blogs, that's a great way, right? That's one way that you can kind of help students to document their learning, share their learning, and you can really evaluate what skills that they're getting through their writing as well, right? Competency-based learning, open badges, right? Recognizing students when they reach certain levels, right? That's a great way to assess the student learning, and also using that technology. Are there any other ways that you use to assess student learning, especially in these project-based learning opportunities? So, I definitely have used the rubrics a lot, as well as just having portfolios, because it really allows you to be open-ended even in how you are assessing your students, right? So hopefully some of these ideas, as you think about the types of projects you're doing, you can also be really creative in how you assess these students. Right, students can also construct criteria as well. There's actually a great a website that Jess will be talking about in her assessing project-based learning webinar right after this. So hopefully you guys can join us for that if you're interested in learning more about how to assess project-based learning. So a few tips on supporting student success through this process. So project-based learning, again, it's a little bit risky because it takes longer time. Again, it's more open-ended, so there's a chance that students could lose interest along the way, or other things could come up, right? If that really might prevent the students from finishing their project, right? And also, some students just lack those planning experiences, lack those organizational skills, because project-based learning activity, it does require higher order thinking skills. It does require just a lot of organizational skills. So just recognizing that these things might come up might help you to also plan ahead and really just make it accessible for your students, and really help facilitate this process, and understand that the students are learning through even their mistakes, and that it's still a meaningful process, and they will learn through this process. Some additional resources are these websites. Edutopia, that has a lot of resources, a lot of curriculum ideas, lesson plans, activities that you can use to help you in your project-based learning. We talked about the Buck Institute for Education, that also has a lot of resources, as well as Youth Learn. I think that has a website. That is a website that has a lot of technology and project-based learning ideas, if you're interested in that. Please write down the websites if you're interested in checking these out. And also, if you are not able to write these down, please feel free to email me as well. So again, I mentioned that we are going to have another webinar, how to assess project-based learning. And again, this will very much go specifically into how to develop those rubrics and using surveys in your project-based learning to really see how your students are learning and how they've grown through that process. And that'll be at 3 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, and that'll be facilitated by Jess, who also works for Foundations, Inc. All right, so we're actually at the end of our webinar, and now is a great time if you have any questions to please write those in the chat box. Raise your hand if you would like to actually ask a question. If you have audio access, we'll be glad to answer any questions that you might have about project-based learning. Also, if you want any handouts from the webinar, please email me. My email address is located right under that question. So again, if you have any questions about project-based learning, please feel free to write those in the chat box or email me. And I just, again, thank you for being part of this webinar. We'll just wait a few minutes and continue on. And if you have any questions, please write them in the chat box. I also encourage you guys to stay connected. I hope that you enjoyed this webinar. We also offer a lot of other webinars through our website, so please check out our website at foundationsinc.org. Please follow us on Twitter. We have updates all the time, every day on Twitter, as well as like us on Facebook. We're actually having a great Facebook campaign in the coming months that will allow you to have access to free resources. So please check us out on Facebook. We would love to connect with you there. And I think, again, if you have any questions, please let us know. I'm going to stop the recording at this time. And it was, again, a pleasure to meet all of you and learn with you. We hope that we will see you again. Thanks again.